All right, Ben, enough horse pucky. We got a show to do.
Oh, sorry.
Come on. Your Ben Jarofsky show for Thursday, August 26th is just moments away. Oh, Ben, all right. But before we do this, we need to thank our sponsors. Sponsors like SEIU Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, the Chicago Federation of Labor, the Chicago Teachers Union, they're sponsors, and Chicago Reader. ChicagoReader.com for all things there is to know the city of Chicago. Where to go, what to do, what to eat, what to drink, what kind of pot to smoke, it's true, and so much more, including columns from our very own Ben Jarofsky. Check out the latest. Surprise, surprise, he rips Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Whoa. What? Crazy.
Whoa.
Chicago Reader, ChicagoReader.com. And if you want to help out this program, you can. ChicagoReader.com/Jarofsky. There, you can become a binhead. That is what we call avid listeners of this program, binheads. You can become a binhead. Find out more, ChicagoReader.com/Jarofsky, JORA, as in victory, SKY. Before we get the show going, Ben, I forgot to play this clip while we had our dear friend Miles Kampf-Lassin on. So let me make good, as they call in the business. He's a Whitney Young Dolphin. The Ben Jarofsky show starts now. It is Thursday, August 26th. And yeah, still live from my apartment and his attic, this is the Ben Jarofsky Show. And now your host, not a Whitney Young Dolphin, Chicago Reader columnist, Ben Jarofsky.
Hello, everybody. Ben Jarofsky here. We're calling this No More Nazis Thursday, and here's why. I'm going to be very brief with my opening remarks because my first guest, Sarah Lazare, is standing by, ready to go on. She's got a lot to say, and I really want to hear what she has to say. But I got to get this off my chest, ladies and gentlemen. We talked about this briefly yesterday. The story broke while we were on the air. I believe we were on the air with young Miles when this story broke. Dennis Miles Kampf-Lassin, the star of In These Times, proud graduate of Whitney Young, where he swam like a dolphin. Miles Kampf-Lassin did. Anyway, the Fraternal Order of Police President Johnny Cannizzaro, who's so far to the right that he falls off the earth, is infuriated because Mayor Lori Lightfoot is requiring that all city workers, including police officers, get vaccinated. And he had a few comments he gave to Fran Spielman, the Ace City Hall reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, who's sort of the go-to reporter for the Fraternal Order of Police. And this is what he said, and I'm quoting. This story broke while we were on the air yesterday, but I didn't get the full quote until afterwards, and now it's in my beloved Bright One. Home delivered. By the way, I just want to say I did not get the Wall Street Journal today, Dennis. I just want to let you know.
Oh, I was wondering.
Yeah, no, it did. That was a one-shot deal yesterday, everybody. I was talking about it yesterday somehow or other. When I went to the front porch, I got my Chicago Sun-Times, my Tribunal, and the New York Times, and there on the porch was the Wall Street Journal. I immediately became a capitalist, immediately began open up a Robinhood account. None of this happened, and immediately ordered Dennis to stop doing work on production and start making investments. And what's the first thing he did? He bought 100 shares of Burger King stock. He got confused. He thought I wanted to get a Whopper, and he bought some stock.
I know.
It's all made up. None of that happened.
And also,
anyways.
in a roundabout way, you stole your neighbor's Wall Street Journal. But go ahead.
It's kind of what happened. They inadvertently put the Wall Street Journal on my porch, and I read it. And I'm a much wiser person. Although, come on, editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. You guys are the biggest frauds in the world. I'm just going to repeat this one more time. It's going to relate to Sarah Lazare's coming up. They were chastising Joe Biden for withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, saying he's no character. You guys work for Rupert Murdoch. Who the hell are you to say anybody has? Who are you to call into question the character of anybody? You work for Fox. I'm just telling you that. You guys like to think, we're up in the Ivy Tower and we're all great theorists and we're like in the abstract. We're not connected to anything. No, you work for freaking Fox. Have you ever watched Fox? Have you ever seen their coverage of COVID, for instance? Have you ever heard their coverage of Afghanistan? How it shifted from when it was Trump pulling out troops to Biden pulling out troops. So I don't know. Wall Street Journal, my one-day experiment reading your editorial page. You're even more pathetic than the Chicago Tribune. And that is saying a lot. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on that tangent. John Cannizzaro, come on. Now, you know, John Cannizzaro, the police union has no bigger supporter in the city of Chicago than me when it comes to pensions. I will fight for the police to get their pensions all night and all day. And I am at odds with many of my lefty brothers and sisters. I do believe that Chicago police officers have collective bargaining rights. And I do appreciate the fact that they have a union and they negotiate their contract. And I stand by you. City of Chicago has been delinquent on that contract, been dragging that thing out for 4 or 5 years. So all that is true. But dude, you are so freaking to the right. It's hurting your union. It's hurting your cause. So for some reason, because you're a Trumper or a MAGA guy, you always have that instinct to defend whatever insanity is coming out of the mouth of MAGA. You did it on January 6th. You got in trouble when your first instinct was to defend the insurrectionists who were pounding cops over the head with hockey sticks. Just imagine if Black Lives Matter protesters in Chicago showed up at a rally with hockey sticks and started hitting cops over the head with a hockey stick. What would Johnny Cannizzaro say then? No, but his first instinct was to tell a boy from WBEZ, I can't remember the reporter's name, so I apologize. It was just a minor little protest, no big deal. Then he kind of sort of apologized for it. And now that MAGA, that always gets you in trouble, John. So the city is saying, you have to get the vaccination. You're a public servant. You're exposed to the virus. You could expose other people to the virus. We want to limit the spread of the virus. You're going to have to get, instead of being like responsible and say, well, we're negotiate this, we want to talk about it. No, this is what he says. We're in America, God damn it. We don't want to be forced to do anything, period. This ain't Nazi fucking Germany where they say, step into the fucking showers. The pills won't hurt you. What the fuck? John Cannizzaro, I don't know if you have any relatives who died in the Holocaust. I do. Like the whole wing of my father's family was wiped out in the Holocaust. What you said was so freaking offensive and so disrespectful to all those people who were slaughtered in a Holocaust. To compare Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who I'm no great fan of, Johnny Cannizzaro. Got a lot of issues with Lori Lightfoot. But to compare her mandating vaccines for public workers to genocide, it's like so brain dead offensive. And I know, MAGA, you reserve the right to offend absolutely anybody that you want to offend. You say you have a liberty, your freedom to do that. And if anybody complains, they're what? What do you always say about them? What's that little line they always use? Snowflakes. But I don't know. Cannizzaro, maybe you should think before you open your big mouth next time. Just think. And I'd like to hear a genuine apology this time. None of that BS apology like Mary Miller, the congresswoman from Southern Illinois, gave the last time MAGA opens his mouth about Nazis and Hitler. Remember what she said? Oh, Hitler was right. And then she tried her apology essentially blame liberals for her saying something stupid. So let's hear a legitimate apology before you go offend everybody who either lost their lives in the Holocaust or had family wiped out in the Holocaust. We got a great show today, everybody. As I said, Sarah Lazare, ace reporter for In These Times, will be joining us. And then in the second part of the show, Fritz Kaegi, Cook County Assessor, will be here to defend his office, the assessor's office, on their assessment of property. That's we talk about covering all bases here. We're going to go from a conversation about Afghanistan to me lamenting my ever-rising property tax bill. It'll be interesting to hear how Fritz Kaegi defends that. So Fritz Kaegi will be our second guest. But let's start with our first guest, the great Sarah Lazare from In These Times. Welcome back, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be back.
And the reason I say welcome back is because Sarah was my guest about 2 weeks ago on a bonus special where we talked about this book, which I'm showing the camera. And of course, nobody can see this except for Sarah. It's the novel that she wrote with her father and it's called Testimony. And it finally arrived a couple days before I went on vacation after the interview, Sarah. And I just got to tell you, it's really a fun read so far. I started it last night. I'm just going to read the opening to everybody. Just, Sarah's like, no, Ben, don't. Let's talk. No, I'm going to read the opening. Okay. Sam was sweating in the best cheap suit he could afford. Walking down State Street in Chicago, his plan was to enter every restaurant, retail store, coffee shop, and tourist trap in the Loop. 3 months out of work and all the goodwill of family and friends pissed through, he was down to skipping meals. He had just left what he thought was a decent impromptu interview with a burly man named Desmond in the Green Door Tavern. Cook, waiter, bar back, it didn't matter. That's the opening. A down and out investigator, and he gets caught up in all kinds of shenanigans having to do with utilities. Sarah, is a good read. I started it last night, so I urge everybody to check it out. Good job so far. So far, Sarah.
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mystery books, as I told to Sarah the last time. All right. So what I want to talk about today with you, Sarah, is the essay you wrote for In These Times that really blew my mind. I want to thank you for writing it. It has nothing to do with investigators. It's not fiction. I wish it were fiction. But it has to do with the way, how do I put this? The way our country is spoon-fed information about wars and how we're constantly, I want to say, brainwashed or gaslit about what our government is up to, what our president is up to, or what our officials are up to, who are all, more often than not, too afraid to speak out about the consequences of the wars they launch. And you were talking in particular in this one essay about the generals who go on talk shows on a regular basis to critique what Joe Biden's up to or critique what Donald Trump's up to, sort of skipping over the fact that they were the architects of the very disastrous war that both Biden and Trump were trying to figure a way to extricate themselves from. So why don't you take a little deeper dive and talk, get a little more specific about what you were getting out in this important essay?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we have seen a very Kafkaesque, very disturbing dynamic emerge where the architects of a brutal 20-year occupation that has achieved nothing good and that has subjected Afghan people to night raids and bombings and civilian deaths, those architects are getting to tell the story of what the legacy of that war is and what the lessons are that we can learn. One person who I really want to point to is General Petraeus. He was commander of US and NATO forces in Afghanistan from 2010 to 2011. He has been everywhere in the press. He has been working all of the major cable news networks. He's quoted all over the place, from the New York Times to NPR. And he is someone who not only has his own reputation to sanitize, but has a conflict of interest. The Intercept reported recently that he is on the board of Optiv Security, which is a military contractor. He's also a partner at KKR, which owns Novaria Group, which holds aerospace manufacturers. But then beyond that, he, from 2010 to 2011, implemented some extremely brutal policies in Afghanistan. He oversaw the counterinsurgency strategy that was really rooted in protracted occupation. He loosened the rules of war. He gave soldiers a wider berth to do things like fire artillery, carry out night raids, destroy homes and buildings. And he oversaw an increase in night raids that are really horrific. I mean, night raids are when U.S. troops break into someone's home in the middle of the night. It's the source of all sorts of trauma and horror. And he also oversaw a dramatic increase in airstrikes. So this person who has a direct financial interest in the war continuing and who had a hand in escalating the war is now hitting all of the different media circuits to argue that the withdrawal from the war is irresponsible, that we should really continue the U.S. military presence. And when people say that with no clear path towards getting out, that's really tantamount to saying that they want open-ended occupation. I'm picking on Petraeus because he is someone who really is good at working the media. He has a long history of doing so. During the Afghanistan war, he, would go and defend what was happening. So at a July 2011 address at the Forum for New Diplomacy in Paris, he declared that things were going great, that the Afghan army and police forces were credible, that they were taking more responsibility from NATO allies, and that, things were in good shape. And we clearly know that that's not the case, which as evidenced by how quickly the Afghan government fell. I mean, talk about a government that has no legitimacy or credibility. But also, he was privately holding positions that were different from what he was saying publicly. So we know from the Afghanistan papers, which were, government documents that were obtained by the Washington Post, that privately in 2017, General Petraeus told government interviewers that he was a bit more pessimistic. And this is a quote. He said, "I knew it was going to be a longer process. I had no expectation that we would be able to flip Afghanistan." So, I would like to make the case that it is not the General Petraeuses of the world that we should be listening to right now. He wasn't entirely truthful. He is conflicted. He has his own reputation to take care of, but rather we should listen to the people who were right about the war, the people who were protesting, September 12th, 2001, saying our grief is not a cry for war. We don't want war. That's not going to make anything better. Why are we giving the microphone to the Petraeuses of the world when we should instead be talking to the people who got it right?
Well, you gave me a lot to ask questions about, Sarah. That was quite a riff. But that last point, I got to just comment on it. Why don't we listen to the people who are right about the war? Yes, 100%. And they were all lefties. So that answers your question. And it just seems to me, and get your thoughts about this, that when it comes to national conversations about the policies, in particular foreign policies and military and launching wars and military intervention, the folks who are most critical of the foreign policy initiatives of the United States are the ones, the last ones to be listened to. I feel much the same way about covering municipal financing in the city of Chicago. The stakes are much lower. But people who are critical about how we raise money in Chicago and how we divvy up the pie are the last people who get listened to. And why is that in your humble? I have my own theories, but why is our country so resistant to the point of hostility to the worldview of, I don't know, the Noam Chomskys of the United States, the people on the left who are almost invariably correct when the years are done and we see the impact of the wars that the powers that be, the masters of war, launch? Why is there such hostility to the left, in your humble opinion?
Wow, that's a really big question. And I don't know that I could definitively lay out all the reasons. I will say that, the U.S. is the biggest military empire the world has ever seen. We have 800 military bases around the world. We have troops deployed in huge swaths of the globe. That military apparatus comes with humongous budgets, a huge industry, and an incredibly well-oiled PR machine. That PR machine, it emanates from Congress. One of the things that's really remarkable about the Afghanistan war is it is truly a bipartisan war. Truly. The only member of Congress who opposed the invasion was Representative Barbara Lee, a Democrat from California. That was it. It's 100% bipartisan. You can't lay that at the feet of Republicans alone, although George W. Bush certainly has a ton of blood on his hands. But yeah, it's a truly bipartisan war. I do want to highlight one of the factors that I'm seeing play out a lot with discourse surrounding this latest withdrawal, which is that we have a lot of really well-funded and slick think tanks who trot out their quote-unquote experts in front of cable news shows. And those think tanks are often funded by the weapons industry And it's this yucky dynamic where companies can essentially launder their own objectives and interests through these ostensibly academic and above the fray and neutral think tanks. And we have seen a ton of people from those think tanks arguing against the withdrawal, arguing for an extension of the war. The Intercept did this really great piece where they basically pointed out that a lot of people who are sort of going in front of cable news have direct ties to the weapons industry. So people like former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. People like Jack Keane, people like Petraeus, people like Rebecca Grant, people like Richard Haas. All these people who are talking heads in this moment sort of have direct ties to the military industry. One of the things, I actually just did a story that went up yesterday where I went through the investor call, the earnings call of Kaegi International. For people who have been following torture and the war on terror, Kaegi International is really notorious because they were sued in 2008 by 3 Iraqis for overseeing their torture at Abu Ghraib, which torture included electric shocks, it included sexual assault. So Kaegi International is already a pretty big villain for people who are concerned about things like that. And I was going through their earnings call, which was from August 12th, and they were openly complaining that their profits are being harmed by the Afghanistan withdrawal. They use words like headwinds caused by the withdrawal, and a headwind, of course, refers to negative growth. Kaegi is also financing a think tank called the Institute for the Study of War. And Kaegi is listed as a corporate sponsor. And this Institute for Study of War is going around saying that we should extend the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. So this is just an example of how there's really this whole industry behind a lot of the so-called experts and above the fray academics who are weighing in right now.
So there's a lot of self-dealings at play here. People go on TV and they promote ideas that actually benefit them, the companies that they represent. So it's hard to discern what when they talk and they make their comments and suggestions and their advice and they offer up their assessment. It's hard to discern what's actually in the public interest and what's in their private interest. That's an ongoing problem, and I don't believe it's ever addressed. I don't watch a lot of boob tube, I got to tell you, Sarah, but I don't feel I've ever seen a commentator ask a general, so what's your side job? You know what's funny? I'm on a tangent within a tangent, but so today I started a story talking about Johnny Cannizzaro, the Fraternal Order of Police, giving quotes to the Sun-Times, just can't help himself, starts talking about Nazis. And in that same article, Bob Ryder of the Chicago Federation of Labor gives his opinion about mandatory mandates, which is no way similar to the one Cannizzaro offered up. But the Sun-Times felt compelled. The Chicago Federation of Labor has an ownership stake in the Sun-Times media. And so whenever the Sun-Times quotes somebody from labor in their paper, and that person is part of the unions that bailed out the Sun-Times, and thank you, unions, for doing that, they feel compelled to mention that as though that qualifies absolutely everything. Well, we just, on the safe side. I don't see that happening ever with these generals. You hear what I'm saying, Sarah Lazare? I do not recall that same impulse to make sure everybody understands it's just a possible conflict of interest. Am I missing something? Have you ever seen any news person say, well, I just want to point out before we listen to General Petraeus a little more, that he is an employee of XYZ who's benefiting possibly from this? Have you ever heard that?
I don't think I've ever heard that from the major media. I can't definitively say it's never happened, but you're totally right that there's this overwhelming trend that those conflicts of interest are not named. And there are so many conflicts of interest. There are, people who are directly on the boards of military contractors and weapons manufacturers. There are also people like Michelle Flournoy, who is a big sort of foreign policy voice in Washington and was a huge supporter of the Afghanistan war. She founded the think tank CNAS, and CNAS gets funded from the weapons industry. So she's also on the board, I think, of a military contractor too. But there are also these like other layers in between people sort of directly being tied to companies where organizations still get funding. And I think think tanks should have to disclose that as well. And I think talking heads from think tanks should have to. And, it's funny because, you just mentioned the Fraternal Order of Police. And I really think that asking people like General Petraeus, asking ex-presidents and top military brass to talk about lessons from Afghanistan is kind of like asking police to investigate themselves for wrongdoing. It's a total joke. Those aren't the people who are going to be honest. People are not going to indict themselves generally as a rule. And so now is a really important time to have critical, rigorous, sober reflection on, things like imperial hubris and bipartisan pro-war consensus. Generals are only ever going to see the solution as being more war. We need to sort of like really radically alter our thinking in this moment and really actually be talking about how do we stop the next invasion from happening.
That is an excellent point. And I fear we're already losing when I read the coverage. I'm also, I want to ask you this question because this sort of gnaws at me. I don't have an answer for this. I don't know if you have an answer for this, but I fear what's going to happen to people in Afghanistan with the Taliban in charge. I absolutely do. Everything I read about that regime scares the hell out of me, and I would not want to live there. So I struggle with this. I believe that there's limits to Americans' military power, and I can't think of many instances where it was justified or where it really helped anybody in the long term. And at the same time, I'm haunted by the reality of what life is going to be like in Afghanistan. Do you yourself feel some of those same, dichotomies, split views?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, we definitely shouldn't play down how tough things are in Afghanistan right now. And I think that the conversation around letting in refugees and opening borders is really important. It's been a little frustrating because a lot of that conversation has been pretty limited. We should only help people who help the United States or worked with the U.S. military. And so my response is like, wait, but what about people who were opposed to the U.S. being there? What about people who were harmed by the U.S.? What about people who lost limbs in U.S. bombing? So I would really like us to really dramatically expand that conversation. I also think that there's a big impulse right now to push economic sanctions on Afghanistan. The history of U.S. sanctions on Iraq, on Cuba, on Venezuela, on Iran, on a number of countries shows that sanctions really just bring more death and destruction and don't really work. So I think that we're going to have to really avoid this kind of like reactive, punitive thinking. But the situation with Afghanistan is really tough because to really understand how the situation came to be, you have to look back not just 20 years, but 40 years to the role of the United States in Afghanistan. And we definitely should not play down the hardship and difficulty for Afghans. And there have been a ton of Afghans in the diaspora organizing around this. Groups like Afghans for a Better Tomorrow have been holding rallies calling for refugees to be treated with dignity. But that doesn't mean there's a U.S. military solution to what's happening. I mean, the Taliban has more power now than when the U.S. invaded in 2001. and all the indicators were that it was gaining power throughout the war. The U.S. project of invasion and then nation building is clearly just a broken project. That's not how you bring real freedom and real well-being to people. And there's something just really cynical and slimy about how media outlets are dealing with this moment right now, because media outlets have just totally ignored the war in Afghanistan. I mean, I think one of the most defining features of this war has been just absolute media silence. It's just became background noise. It became considered not newsworthy at all. Jim Loeb, a journalist, wrote this piece for Responsible Statecraft. The headline is 3 major networks devoted a full 5 minutes to Afghanistan in 2020.
Wow.
And so, but then suddenly, as soon as the war ends, there's all this coverage of the civilian hardship. And we should always care about civilians. We should always care about people suffering from war and the consequences and the blowback. But there's just something so slimy and disingenuous about how sanctimonious and self-righteous and smug all of these publications are being right now, because they enabled a really lethal, really brutal U.S. occupation that carry on for 20 years.
Absolutely. Well put. Really well put. I sent you as a homework assignment. I don't know if you were able to complete that assignment. One thing you're going to learn as you become a guest in the Ben Joravsky Show, there are no punishments for people who don't complete the homework assignments that I give them. Unfortunately, and there's no accountability. But I sent you this essay that some fellow wrote for Bloomberg, I think it was, a right-winger. I just wanted you to get your response to it. Did you have a chance to read that story?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, God bless you. You did your assignment. And so he's trying to make the case for why we're pouring on so much attention to what's going on. And his argument comes down to oh my God, his argument is so over the map. But his argument is that it's such a debacle the way Biden is handling it, that it just cries to be covered. In general, what's your response to the arguments that this gentleman raised?
I mean, I think that the media is covering this from a reflexively pro-war position, and that such claims are in bad faith. It doesn't mean that there isn't reason to be concerned. So, I want to separate this out a little bit, because there are those who are genuinely concerned. There are people who are frantically trying to make sure family members are okay, who are really worried, who are trying to get out of the country. That is real. But then there's a whole class of people who are invoking that difficulty to push their pre-existing agenda of supporting an extension of the U.S. occupation. And those are there's no shortage of people doing that right now. Like Jake Tapper, for example, who has never questioned the war and has mostly ignored the civilian hardship, just absolutely grilled Blinken about the suffering that's happening right now. And he's not wrong that suffering is happening, but when you're only looking at it from that pro-war perspective, you're never going to see the root causes. You're never going to see the role of the U.S. military presence itself in stoking it. The reality is that the U.S. military presence was very lethal, very violent. I used to work at Common Dreams, which is a progressive media outlet. And one of the things that I did really regularly was write up United Nations reports that reported on how many civilians had died that year in Afghanistan. How many died at the hands of the U.S.-backed Afghan government, how many died at the hands of the U.S. And it was just incredibly bloody, and none of these people ever talked about it. And that reality was also lethal and was also unsustainable. So it makes my skin crawl a little bit to see all of these people mugging for the camera when they have not cared at all. This war has been going on for 20 years, and they have not cared. They decided to care 2 weeks ago, and are patting themselves on the back for it.
Yeah, that's well put. And the other thing is that they're looking for an opportunity to show that they're tough on Joe Biden as well, which has absolutely nothing to do with the fundamental problems of allowing the military free reign. And I'll just point this out before I let you go. I said this yesterday, but this one sticks with me. Man, the critical reporting on the pulling at the ending of the war far just like dwarfs it just, in contrast to the lack of critical thinking at the start of the war. You know, when we end the war, the anguish this country put the country through, you know what I'm saying, Sarah? And I'll just go baby boomer on you for a moment. They get away with it in part because they ended the draft. Because I'm old enough to remember Vietnam. And the amount of resistance across the board to Vietnam was directly, in my humble opinion, related to the fact that everybody was being drafted to fight that war, unless you could get out of it with by saying you're going to college at deferment or that kind of thing. And so the lesson they learned from Vietnam was not, oh, we shouldn't launch these wars, get involved in other countries' civil wars and bomb the hell out of countries. The lesson they learned is, oh, we'll do it with a volunteer army. Do you follow what I'm saying, Sarah Lazare?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. You know, I will say, talk about underreporting. There has actually been a GI resistance movement against the war on terror. It definitely isn't of the same scale as we saw during Vietnam, but you know, Travis Bishop was a service member who went to prison for refusing to deploy to Afghanistan. Here in Chicago in 2012, at the NATO summit, members of Iraq Veterans Against the War, that's what they were called at the time. Now they're called About Face Veterans Against the War. But, you know, veterans of the war on terror, it included Afghanistan vets. They angrily discarded their war on terror medals in protest. They threw them at the NATO summit. They did it marching hand in hand with a group called Afghans for Peace. That group's name eventually changed, but that's what they were called at the time. But basically the point is that it hasn't gotten very much coverage, but there actually has been a small GI resistance movement and anti-war veteran movement that had, you know, folks who either were being told to deploy to Afghanistan or had deployed and based on what they witnessed, decided that the war was immoral.
I was making a different point, and I'll just close by just saying it one more time. If we brought back the draft, I think it would be that much harder just to for the military to just launch wars all over at the drop of a hat. Oh, we're going to invade Iraq now. Oh, we're gonna go invade Afghanistan and stay there for 20 years. Jake Tapper might be singing a different song if he was facing being sent over to Afghanistan. That's just what I'm saying. The reality, and I'm just saying that is from the perspective of an old boomer who remembers thousands and thousands of people in the streets there. And guess what? Those people, when they grew up, they weren't like your dad. They weren't good lefties to the end. They were only lefties for like the 10 minutes in their life when they were facing the draft. I'm just saying it, Sarah Lazare. I'm just pointing it out, okay? That's just my opinion. Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thank you for the good work that you do. And I'm going to be bugging you for a while because you do a lot of great work in these times, bringing the issues like this attention. I probably should do a whole show on the Afghanistan papers, which we didn't even get into. I may drag you back for that because that's fascinating. As Sarah said, the things they say publicly are the different big shock here are different than the things they say privately.
Otherwise known as lying.
Yes, otherwise known as lying. That's the great Sarah Lazare from In These Times. You could check out and get all her follow her stories by just Googling In These Times. And she's also, one more time, the co-author of Testimony, a novel. Totally different. It's a mystery book. And if you want to check out Sarah's thoughts on mysteries, radical mysteries, I call it radical noir. Did an interview with her on that topic. Didn't even talk about Afghanistan. We just talked about radical noir. So she covers the waterfront. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Good to talk to you.
All right. That's Sarah Lazare. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Fritz Kaegi, Cook County Assessor. I'm going to be moaning and groaning about my property taxes. We'll be right back after this.
Hey, remember, you can download previous Ben Joravsky shows, Benny J bonus interviews, and so much more. ChicagoReader.com/Joravsky or wherever else you download your favorite podcast. Tomorrow, we cover the week that was in Chicago and or Illinois news, and it's a segment that we call, Oh, What a Week It Was. Check it out tomorrow, 1 p.m., talking all things the Chicago and Illinois news. Welcome back to the Ben Joravsky Show, live from my apartment in his attic.
Yes, we're waiting for Fritz Kaegi, Cook County Assessor, to join us. I just got the text that he's about to join. There's Fritz Kaegi, looking handsome and dapper as always.
Well, right back at you, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Fritz Kaegi is the assessor of Cook County, and he's also a proud graduate of Kenwood High School, as he usually tells you, like within the first minute of a conversation with you. And so I'm going to do everything I can, Fritz Kaegi, to keep myself from talking about how your beloved alma mater has one hell of a basketball team. I want to give a shout out to Coach Mike Irvin. They have one of the best players in the country. I think he's ranked 4th in the country right now. His name is J.J. Taylor. Chicagoans, remember that name. But I'm going to tell you about a secret weapon that Kenwood has. Shotty Anderson, I see you. Get the ball there, Shotty. He can hit that 3-point shot. So I'm looking forward to Kenwood High School basketball. Fritz Kaegi, I'm a huge basketball fan, and I love high school basketball and your alma mater. I don't know if do you still follow your alma mater?
I sure do. I love it. It's one of the keys to my identity. It turned my life around, and I'm a fan.
Yeah, no, I'm going to restrain myself. I mean, why? We could talk about basketball, or we could talk about property taxes. No, sorry, just kidding.
We could do a little bit of both. Suffice it to say is you can't get much more like authentically Chicago than high school basketball and all the traditions that it has. It's pretty great.
Yeah, so maybe I'll see you at one of the games this year. I plan to check out Kenwood High School because they truly have one of the outstanding teams in the city of Chicago right now. All right, let's get down to business.
Amazing thing since you came in.
Oh, so you do? Wow, you do follow. Good for you.
They changed the coach a few years ago. I follow it. You know, I don't, not day to day, but I know enough to be dangerous probably.
All right, let's get down to business on property taxes. This has been my obsession for quite a while. And I'll tell you, Fritz, my obsession with property taxes precedes your getting elected. You got elected in, 2018. So you're running for re-election next year. I don't even know if you have do you have an opponent?
Not aware of one.
Okay. It's really hard to lose an election. Fritz, I'm going to give you a little election advice. It's really hard to lose an election if you don't have an opponent, which is something we may have discussed the last time we were running, as I recall. But we're not going to go back and relitigate those old fights. In 2003, I want to say, Fritz, I got sticker shock. I live on the north side of Chicago. I live in an area that was, when I moved to my home in 1985, it was, I mean, many Northsiders can tell this. It's just like a regular, ordinary kind of working class neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. Factories on the block. Prices were relatively low. Taxes were relatively low. And then it took about 20 years for gentrification to kick in. And one day I opened my property tax bill, Fritz Kaegi, and it had gone from about, I'm doing this off the top of my head, $1,500 to $4,000. And that's sticker shock. I'm like, God.
And that was under Daley when he didn't raise the levy.
Yes. Okay, now now raising the levy already. And I learned all this stuff, Fritz. I got so outraged. I learned what do you mean, what Fritz Kaegi means about raising the levy. I know he is smiling when he says that because, of course, they always raise the levy. So I guess I'm going to let you off the hook with the first point that must be made and give you an opportunity to make it. The role that your office plays in this is not, in my humble opinion, the role most responsible for the rise in property taxes. In my humble opinion, the rise in property taxes is because educational spending, public school spending is linked to the property tax by and large in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. And as long as that happens, as long as 52% of our property taxes are being delivered to the public schools of Chicago because the state's not picking up the money and the feds
it's even more in the suburbs.
Even more in the suburbs, we're going to have high property taxes. So I'm going to give you that opportunity to start right there. Go ahead, Fritz.
Yeah. So a lot of times people ask, why are property taxes high in Illinois? It's because we're dead last in the nation for our state helping to pay the bill for educating our children. And so in our state, more than any other place, local school districts are responsible for taxing property to raise the money to educate kids. And that right there creates a huge, enormous inequity, even if everyone can agree on assessments. And a lot of and this is why systemically property taxes are so enormous in the south suburbs, because they don't have much property value there. But they have to, they are on their own. The state leaves them on their own for paying for the cost of educating our children. So that you have a large amount of money over a small amount of property value, and it creates a huge rate. And it's not fair to people in places like Harvey when that happens. So whenever I talk to business groups or community groups about talking about how we reduce the inequities in the property tax system, I always start with that first, because that is the biggest inequity. But then we don't want to stack even more inequity on that by having distorted assessments, which can further warp and distort how we divide up the cost of paying for education. So my role is to eliminate those distortions so it's not even more inequitable than it was to start with.
All right. So let's break it down, and I'm going to keep it as easy to understand as I possibly can, because you can make it really complicated or you can make it understandable.
Yep.
Many of my listeners out there are probably renters, and so they're not aware of the property tax system because they haven't even seen a property tax bill. But let me assure you, renters, that the property tax increases in the property taxes are passed on to you in the form of higher rents. So you might as well pay attention to this, even if you've never seen a property tax bill. It goes to the landlord. Property tax bill is essentially created by, there's like three things, basically. One is the value of your property. Two is the tax rate. The tax rate is essentially the same across the board for everybody. So the higher your property is valued compared to everybody else, the more you're going to pay relative to everybody else. And that's where Fritz Kaegi's office comes in, because their office is the one who determines the assessed value of your property, how much your property is going to be worth, quote unquote, when it comes to multiplying that tax rate by it. The higher they say your property's worth, the more you're going to pay.
And the other piece of that, Ben, is that it's not only about you, but your taxes are affected by how other people are assessed, because you're all splitting up a pie. And if there's one person who's 50% underassessed, you make up the difference, and other people make up the difference. And that's why, I think to do a good job here, you got to be a mirror and eliminate all those distortions, because every person has an interest in everyone else being assessed fairly.
Absolutely. And I was watching your interview that your assistant, Scott, shout out to Scott, was so dutiful to send to me with Paul Lisnick of WGN, who, by the way, was really rocking it in that bow tie. I'm just saying, Paul Lisnick.
He's a sharp dresser.
God damn. I got to up my game.
I need a better Zoom quality is what I was thinking.
But anyway, and so Paul said something that was an interesting little exchange that you had, or maybe it was you that said it. Rule of thumb, always appeal. I can't remember which one of you said this. Always appeal. So whatever this gentleman says your property is worth, or his office's computer, always appeal Chicago. Why? Because big time downtown developers, they're appealing. And as Fritz Kaegi just said, if they win their appeal and get a lower assessment, that means you will pay more in property taxes to compensate for the break the downtown property owners are getting. So this crazy system we have, Fritz Kaegi, is rooted in this fundamental reality. It pays to appeal. Do you agree with me? That's an insane way to run a property tax system. Go ahead.
I agree. And it doesn't work like that in the rest of the country. I don't know how many people here, who are watching here today who've lived in Chicago and tried to go to another place and appeal. And they kind of look at you as like, well, the data shows your property is worth this, my friend. And even I was visiting downstate assessors a couple of weeks ago just to see what sorts of legislation we could do to improve the system. Even downstate, less than 10% of parcel owners appeal down there. We really have this culture up here of appealing. Now, I understand why, because data has been way off. A lot of people didn't have trust in this office and other offices for good reasons. And you get this sense that the system at different levels is rigged, so you might as well play along. And so I understand that behavior from the point of view of the homeowner. It can make sense. But the key to fixing this is really making sure that our assessments are more on the dot. We're eliminating those distortions from the start. And then we try to make sure we have good enough evidence that we don't have new distortions introduced by appeals by those big property owners. We came in, there was a study shown looking at all the big commercial properties that traded hands in 2018. They were 40 or 50% underassessed in Cook County and Chicago as a whole. 40% across Cook County, 50% in Chicago. And it was even worse than that. The bigger your property got, the more underassessed you tended to be. And the more you're out in the neighborhoods, the more closer to the mark your assessment was. So it was like regressive in a couple different ways. And our goal is to narrow that gap, to eliminate that gap, to make sure we're using good data, assessing at market, because we can thereby reduce the homeowner's share of the burden that they've had to take on because of that underassessment. And we don't do it just because we're playing favorites. We're doing it because we're trying to be a good mirror to the market, and folks who are not insiders in this world always got the short end of the stick. And it was really impactful. I estimate just that disparity on commercial might have cost the average Chicagoan $1,000 a year on their property tax bill. So it's really enormous and consequential. And what we've been doing is we reassessed the south suburbs last year. We reduced homeowners' share of the burden by 2 percentage points. The previous year in the northern suburbs, we did the same. And we're now reassessing Chicago, and we expect that to continue.
Well, one of the complaints I've been hearing is from business owners, commercial owners. When I reached out to people, say, "Hey, Fritz Kaegi's coming on my show. What do you want to ask them?" And they go, "We're getting creamed. We're getting reamed." He's giving these breaks to the homeowners, and it's just passing the burden over to commercials. And a lot of us are small-time business owners. We don't have the money. We don't have them. We can't hire Ed Burke to represent. Oh, Ed Burke's out of business these days. But we can't hire Mike Madigan's law firm. We can't hire John Cullerton's law firm. You know, we can't play with the major players in this operation. We're getting cream. What's your response to business owners who say that you're unfairly passing the burden onto them?
Well, I disagree with the premise because, first of all, like when we looked at COVID last year and we saw the devastating effect that it had on lots of different kinds of commercial properties, lots of businesses, and we leaned into it. And we did that because we saw the effect it would have on the small hotel owner, the owner of a theater, the owner of a retailer in the south suburbs. We know how those communities live on the edge, and that was the whole reason why it made no sense for us to send out assessments that didn't take that into account. So, and we made adjustments to small businesses in neighborhoods out in Jefferson Park and Jefferson and Southwest Side. So, you know, I disagree with the premise there. The key is that all commercial is not the same. You need to look at, you know, I grew up on the South Side, you know, from Kenwood. 43rd Street is different from 53rd Street, is different from Stony Island, is different from 71st Street. And you need to be able to differentiate. And those businesses there deserve to have a differentiated approach from there versus what you have going on elsewhere or in more prosperous areas. And having good data is really important to that, and just being mindful of the difference is important because, like I said, the fewer distortions we have, the better off. And I think small businesses have not been well served by the system because the data that our office had, it seemed to create this disparity where you are under assessing the biggest properties, and the lower ones tend to be relatively over-assessed. The smaller ones tend to be relatively over-assessed, and that wasn't fair to them. So you don't want to mix fish and fowl, but like overall, especially the bigger properties downtown, they were very under-assessed when we came in, and everyone else is making up the difference, including those small businesses.
All right. Before I go into the neighborhoods and talk about the impact of gentrification, since you're raising the issue of downtown properties and the assessment, I'm going to get right to my pet peeve, and I think you know what's coming. One of my pet peeves, I've written about it like 3 or 4 times, Fritz, is this really gets me going. I'm just, my juices are flowing as I think about. I'm trying to be calm and rational and everything. But part of the game that's played, and it's right on display with a certain Trump Tower, right there on the banks of the Chicago River, that our city leaders enabled Donald Trump to put his freaking name on the side of that building, which really just gets to me every time I see that name there. Okay. Well, that name is a deterrent, apparently, to the people who own the building are trying to rent out the commercial spaces, etc. Because, people don't want to be affiliated with Donald Trump in the city of Chicago. He's perhaps the most unpopular politician in the city of Chicago. I can make that argument, Fritz Kaegi, that Donald Trump is the most unpopular politician in the city of Chicago. So if you put his name on your building, that is a deterrent to renting out your building. They turn right around and ask for the county assessor and to lower their assessment, the amount that they're taxed at, because they can't rent the building. You can't rent the building because you got that freaking name out there. So, Fritz, I'll never understand how they get away with both. Either take the name down, in which case you might be able to rent out that vacant space and you'd be applauded, or stop begging for a handout from the taxpayers of Illinois because you want to essentially polish Donald Trump's ego. Address that issue.
Well, Ben, this is a subset of a bigger problem that in the past, our assessment system, the policy was that if your building was vacant, we're going to reduce your assessment. And if you kept the building 100% vacant, under the old policy, they'd reduce your assessment by 90%. And it was bonkers, man. So I just mentioned 71st Street. This is a great classic commercial corridor in South Shore. And we talked, during our transition, we talked to the Chamber of Commerce there, and they said, your policy, the policies of your office, and this was, my predecessor, the policies of your office are incentivizing vacancy, that there are people who are buying properties, stashing them, not keeping them occupied, and waiting to make the money on the appreciation of the underlying land while they minimize their tax. And this was going on all over. You talk to Michelle Smith, Alderman of the 43rd Ward, you go up to Six Corners on the northwest side, you go all over, you hear these complaints and people talking about it. Like Clark Street in Lincoln Park, there are all these vacant spots. Why? Well, they were incentivizing vacancy. So we changed that. We put in place a change in the policy last year that said that we're going to give credit to every building in the area for the neighborhood vacancy rate, whether it's 100% occupied or not. And if you have additional vacancy, we'll give you temporary partial credit for it, but not the whole thing. And by the way, we're going to, when we value your building, we're going to value it as if we were a typical buyer. So you can set yourself on fire, you can make your place reek or whatever, but a typical buyer is not going to do that. And they're going to build in more reasonable expected rent and vacancy rate into what they do. And I'm not going to single out any particular building, but Trump Tower might be a pretty good example of where, we're going to look at how other buildings like it in terms of their dollar per square foot for retail space, for hotel space and office space are just like any other place in the neighborhood.
So, Fritz, are you telling me that Donald Trump, or Trump Tower, I should just say, is paying more in property taxes now than it was when you took office because of these changes?
Well, we get to reassess Chicago this year. A lot of people don't know that there is a 3-year cycle to reassessing the county. So, and the schedule is determined by the state. So we reassessed suburbs the last 2 years. This is the most important year for our reforms because we're reassessing Chicago. And then it'll affect their taxes next year. We'll be sending out assessments in the township that includes Trump Tower pretty soon. I myself don't know the answer because we have a valuation team that makes those valuation decisions themselves, but I expect, we'll all know about this in the next month or so.
Can you assure our listeners that when Donald Trump's lawyers, and it's no longer Ed Burke, I should say, Ed Burke, I don't think has any property tax business, but Ed Burke, former finance chair of the city council, one of those powerful aldermen in the city of Chicago, as everybody knows, ran a very successful property tax business for a while. Big surprise there. And he represented Donald Trump.
Why do elected officials always as a side gig pick this industry, Ben? It's the strangest coincidence. Anyway.
That's a whole other side conversation, but let's just pause to point out that the Speaker of the House, Michael Joseph Madigan, the former Speaker of the House, I should say, has a property tax business. The former President of the State Senate, John Cullerton, had a property tax business. The most powerful alderman in the Chicago City Council, who oversaw every TIF deal, we'll get into TIFs in a little while, and all city budgets had a property tax business. Before you came on, Fritz Kaegi, we were talking about conflict of interest with generals who go on TV shows. They work for defense firms and they advocate war in Afghanistan or Iraq without telling the TV guy, oh, by the way, I work for this think tank or this arms manufacturer. So yes, these are conflicts of interest. So are you going to assure our listeners that when Donnie Trump's lawyers come in with their cockamamie argument to get their assessment lower, that they can't rent out, are you going to go tell them, guy, get that name off that building and see how you rent the property? You're going to tell them that when they come before your group, before they come?
I'll put it this way. We're not going to build in the negative effect of Trump into the value or any other kind of self-inflicted thing into the value of a building, because a buyer wouldn't do that. So, what everyone should know, and I don't know if everyone knows, when I ran as the assessor, I've never taken a campaign contribution from these lawyers and appraisers who practice before the office. I'm the first Cook County assessor to do that. The public is sick of that stuff. I think a lot of the folks who did this and it was tolerated before, people looked the other way. They don't tolerate that in the same way before. I think there's a lot more scrutiny. We have a visitor's log. Anyone who's coming in can see. So if these wise guys come in, they're going to have to sign in there. So you'll know if they come in, and you can ask me about it. We put up a couple portraits of my passive-aggressive Swiss ancestors on the wall, and they look very stern if you try to come up with those BS arguments. And a lot of these guys, they create these appraisals that try to argue that a bacon double cheeseburger is really a salad. We've got really good valuation team guys that can see through that. Our rules do not allow those bogus appraisals anymore. Our analysts don't see the identity of the lawyers in the appeals anymore. It's anonymized. So we've tried to eliminate any perception that some wise guy can get you a special deal. You should hire, if you're going to hire one of those lawyers, you might as well hire them like you hire an investment manager, an accountant. And some guy who's an alderman is probably not going to be the best data analytics guy you could find.
All right. And I'd like to point out that there's a Bulldog investigative reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times named Tim Novak, who's been all over this story for years about Trump Tower and the deals they've gotten thanks to Ed Burke, looking out for Donald Trump. I'm sure Tim Novak will be watching this one very carefully to make sure that this doesn't go further. So Tim Novak.
That scrutiny. That scrutiny is good.
All right, so let's talk about, that's the future. Let's talk about the past right now. And I owe a thanks, a tip of the hat to Novak, because he's the one who broke this story. And you followed up with an essay in the Sun-Times that you wrote with Barbara Flynn Curry, another Hyde Park resident. Anyway, where you were talking about past breaks that Trump Tower got, and how right now Trump, my blood is boiling. He's looking to get a handout from the taxpayers. I'm not doing it off the top of my head, about $1 million, I want to say. Fritz, correct me, I'm wrong with the exact amount.
The Chicago Public Schools are going to have to write a check out of their bank account to Donald Trump. The total amount is $1 million across the taxing body, so it'll be like more than $500,000 for the schools.
And he's getting that money, arguing that he can't rent his buildings. So retroactively, are you going to raise the sign defense? In other words, right now he's looking for a check for $1 million from the public school children of Chicago because he couldn't rent that building with the sign on it. Are you going to use that argument retroactively? Go ahead.
I mean, Barbara and I, we wrote this because this body is so bonkers. So we have, at a certain point, there's a certain point where having appeals, it addresses errors, it addresses injustice. You can appeal at the assessor's office, appeal at board review, but then there are these other venues. And in the dead of the night in '95, in a Republican-controlled General Assembly, without hardly any debate except for Barbara raising her lone voice along with a couple others, they extended PTAB as this other fourth venue to Cook County. And this case for the Trump Tower that you're talking about, it dates to like 2012 or 2011. So there could be more bites at the apple because they have this giant backlog that's accumulated where everyone, after they got their bites at the apple at different levels, they're going for another bite of the apple at PTAB. And there's this backlog of years and years, and the outflow from taxing bodies has grown 20% per year compounded. That is a disaster. That is a ticking time bomb. And we don't even know the cost of it yet, slowly, because they've got this big backlog. So there's this unknown contingent liability for all our taxing bodies. And all this body does is make it more inequitable. All it does is reduce the share of the pie for the biggest property owners at the expense of everyone else, and drains cash from cash-strapped taxing bodies. And guess who makes up the difference? Everyone else. So this is as we called it, the shining example of systemic, and it's the ultimate example of systemic inequity, only furthering, it doesn't exist for any good purpose in Cook County. Now, downstate, it acts more like a second venue than a fourth. So I see the argument for downstate, but in Cook County, it's entirely unnecessary, and it should be done with, clear the decks.
You use the acronym PTAB. What does that stand for?
It stands for the Illinois Property Tax Appeals Board.
Yeah. So they created a third board.
And it was a thing that existed in the 70s for downstate bodies. And Then it was extended to Cook County, the dead of the night, with hardly any debate. A couple of years later, the Senate passed a bill, taking it out of Cook County because they realized what a disaster it was going to be. The Mayor Daley supported getting it out of there. Assessor Houlihan supported getting it out of there, but it didn't get a vote in the House. Guess why? But we're now seeing the toll. This experiment has been a disaster. Let's be done with it so we don't have this crazy ticking time bomb, this engine of inequity just hanging out there, making a system that's already in really bad shape even worse.
By the way, when you said guess why, I assume what you were getting at is that the Speaker of the House was Michael Joseph Madigan, who has his own property tax business. Is that what you were sort of suggesting?
I would imagine that might have had something to do with the fact that he didn't get the vote. Although Barbara Frank Curry sponsored the bill, and she was the person who originally spoke against it, and she was an ally of his. But I think he recused himself, and when the Speaker who decides when you vote doesn't want it, I'm going to guess that had something to do.
Yeah, ally, schmally. He's got a property tax business he's got to take care of. Sorry, Barbara Flynn Curry. That's how the game is played with Michael Madigan. All right, let's move on to gentrification and the impact. There was an article in the Sun-Times, I think it was Monday, Tuesday, I can't remember which days are piling together. Residents and property owners in Pilsen are outraged because they got that same sticker shock I got about 15 years ago, because when gentrification hits, what it does, ladies and gentlemen, your property goes up in value, even if your income hasn't gone up in value. So they're taxing you on your property as though you could afford it on the marketplace. And the reality is, when I bought my house on my reader's salary back in 1985, wasn't even working for the reader yet, I could afford it. I could not afford my house in 2004 when I first got that sticker shock. That's just the reality. My income did not keep pace with the rising costs of my housing, to which the powers that be in a free market world will say, well, tough luck. You just got to go sell your house. I'm like, how could you be forcing me to sell my house? You guys are the same people making the argument that you shouldn't be forced to wear a mask, for crying aloud. Now I've been forced to sell my house. Oh my goodness. So what's your response to the people in Pilsen who are waking up with sticker shock, Fritz Kaegi?
Well, gentrification is it is a double-edged sword, and it's one of the hardest things we confront. So it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, your investment grew. You made money on your investment. On the other hand, your assessment that reflects the market value of your investment also grew and can increase your taxes. Now, one of the things that's always really important to remember is that people assume that a change in your assessment, like if your assessment grows by 50%, that your tax also grows by 50%. Not true, because it is about your share of total assessed value. If all assessed value is also growing by 25%, your tax will grow or won't grow by nearly the same amount, or maybe even go in the opposite direction. So in the suburbs, the last couple of years, there have been all sorts of places where people's residential assessment grew, but their tax bill fell because they had a smaller share of the levy. So we saw this in a lot of places. In the south suburbs, about half of people's property tax bills went down in this last year, in the season just on, even though assessments for most of them went up. So that's an important distinction to remember, because it's not intuitive. Most other places in the country aren't like that. And why is that? It's because your taxes depend on how other people are assessed. That's like the thing that's different about here. It's why it's so important for us to be equitable. And I do not like raising people's assessments. I don't like property taxes. I think we ought to have a better way of funding government and funding schools. But given that we do have it, doing this fairly is really important, because if we're going out and telling big building owners that we're assessing you at market value, we have to have the same standards for others. And constitutionally, if I don't do that, all those things that we're doing to make sure that others pay their fair share can be unwound. So, it does require a little bit of faith that when your assessment goes up, your tax bill won't go up by the same amount. But all I can say is that's what's happened the last 2 years. And we don't have a better solution for this than making sure everyone gets their exemptions. So make sure you get homeowners, senior, especially if you're a senior with an income under 65,000, you're eligible for the senior freeze. We have a couple of other exemptions too. And you do have the opportunity to appeal if we got that assessment wrong. Like, we are a couple hundred people trying to estimate the value of nearly 2 million properties. We're going to make mistakes like any other assessment office could, and make sure we get that right. Like, a lot of times, especially if someone's owned a house for a long time, they haven't renovated interiors, they haven't put in AC, and our assessment might not take into account that quality difference from the other things that have sold. And so we can always take another look. I encourage people who have seen that big increase in their assessment to see if we got that right. People are the experts on their own homes. Yeah. You don't have to hire a lawyer. You bring it to our attention, and we can fix that.
Yeah. Although I will say this, in the reality, by the way, just to answer your first point that you made, I jotted it down. Yes, it's good that your property went up in value, but that's really of no consequence for you unless you sell it, and that gets to the very point. You know, which oh wow, my property. I know, like, hey man, I bought this thing for $100,000. Now I can sell for $200,000. Oh, you want to sell your house? No. Well, what good is it? Are you just paying more in taxes?
It's cash out the door. I get it.
So you know,
and this is why I mean, we should take a step back, and it is really unfair that, especially, you know, for Black and brown people, or people who are just getting a foothold in the middle class, that you have more of your savings invested in your home than richer people do. Richer people, they're invested in other kinds of financial assets like stocks and bonds and all that other stuff. Yeah. They don't have to pay an asset tax on the stuff that they own. They don't have to worry about this annual, you know, tax on your wealth for their stocks and their other stuff. But for folks who are just getting started saving, we have to do this. And really the reason why is our city, our school districts are not given any other tool. And they have to cover all of the costs of educating children with less help from the state than any other place in the union. So this is why I've spent a lot of time saying, not only should the state be finding ways to finance it, so I stuck my neck out to be an advocate for the fair tax amendment, but also federal government has really abdicated on this. You know, A. Philip Randolph, great Chicagoan, called for one of the 5 pillars of civil rights was federal funding for education for disadvantaged students. Started under LBJ. It's kind of been frozen at the level that it's been at for quite a while. It's called Title I. Well, President Biden, to his credit, is going to double Title I in the budget. And, you know, the CPS gets $300 million in Title I. Their levy is $3 billion. So if they double that, that theoretically could take a big chunk out of the growth in the levy of CPS. And so that's where we can really move the needle. And, like, by the way, the federal government, it's $15 additional billion for this. They eat that for breakfast. That's less than what they did to bail out the airlines nationwide. So this is good bang for the buck, and it would have a good effect on wealth. If you look in the South suburbs, if you're taking the pressure off the levy in some of those South suburban school districts, it'd be like a jolt of adrenaline for housing prices down there.
By the way, when Fritz says levy, what he means is the amount of money in property taxes that any taxing body is going to spend. So that's the other part of this whole equation. But essentially, what goes is that let's say the city of Chicago says we want to spend $100 this year, and then so Fritz Kaegi figures out how much the property, each individual piece of property is worth, and then I guess who it was, it's the clerk. It's so freaking complicated.
It is complicated, but the way I explain it is like
the clerk figures out the rate that you have to apply to all that assessment to meet the levy. Are you following these people? And then they kick it over to Maria Pappas, who has to write the checks. Right. And every time she writes the check, I've been hearing Maria Pappas say the same thing forever. Don't blame me. I'm just the one. Right.
Well, the way I explain it is you got the burden, which is and it's not really a burden in some cases. It's the cost of educating our children and paying for all the services that we get in the city. And that's like a lump sum of dollars. It grows a little bit every year. And then how do we split that burden amongst us? That's where assessments come in. We only do assessments to figure out everyone's share of that burden that someone else came up with.
Yeah.
But the assessments do not determine the burden. That's determined by your schools and your taxing district.
That is a point that I've heard every assessor make since I've been covering this stuff. Tom Hines, Ben, wait, you can't blame me because Joe Barrios used to tell me that. Ben, don't blame me. Everybody, Ben, don't blame me. It's a crazy system, Fritz Kaegi, you've inherited. And now let's add one last piece before I let you go, and that, of course, is the TIFs. You knew you wouldn't escape this show without me asking you about the TIFs. It really, you talk about things that really grind my gears.
Oh, it's folks, terrible, Ben. They're terrible. Just so people know what I'm going to talk about now. Follow this one, listeners, because this is how it affects you. TIFs are tax hikes. Why do I say they're tax hikes? Because whenever they impose a TIF, whenever they create a TIF district like the one they did for Lincoln Yards on the near north side of Chicago, what they do is they limit the amount of property taxes that all the taxing bodies can get from that TIF district. And what's the impact? If you limit the amount of property taxes that you can get out of some of the most the gentrifying communities of the city, all the rest of you suckers and saps pay more in property taxes to compensate for the money they're not getting from the Lincoln Yards TIF or any TIF. And what really irritates me, Fritz, is that your office is never called in to discuss when the city or the county or a suburb, Evanston's got their own cockamamie TIFs they're coming up with too. They can be even worse in the suburbs because they can have really unpredictable concentrated effects on people in the suburbs.
No, also because no one's paying attention, but that's a whole other thing. Oak Park, I think you live in Oak Park. Oak Park's got crazy TIFs too. They're wasting money.
In Proviso, they have some really bad ones that have helped to increase the amount of taxes that people are paying.
And you're going to get this one on your, don't think you're going to avoid this one. Arlington Heights, when they try to get the Bears to come out there. Hey, folks in Arlington Heights, you think the Bears are going there without you contributing? It's going to be a TIF. And they're going to use your property tax dollars to give the Bears money. Mm-hmm. And the Bears are wretched. Don't even get me started talking about the Bears. So this is my question. Your office is never asked to participate. So before the city council votes on a TIF, they never say, oh, Cook County Assessor, what's the impact of this TIF on the property tax that everyone in Chicago will pay? Whenever they raise property taxes to pay for schools, it's funny, Fritz Kaegi, they always have like, well, this will add $52 to the cost of the average home. You know, old boy from the Federation or whatever, that downtown civic group, they always have the exact amount. Chamber of Commerce is always yelling at you, Fritz, because they don't like you're too hard on downtown businesses. I've never once heard the Chamber of Commerce do the calculations of what their cockamamie Lincoln Yards TIFs and the other one they have.
There's always some magic pixie dust to make up for the backdoor tax increase, right?
So does your office have the capability to step in and point out how much the Lincoln Yards TIF, for instance, is adding to the property taxes that all of us in the city of Chicago pay?
And what we can do is we've put out tools so that people can see how much property taxes change if you change the base. So, for example, people can see if we're going to be increasing the value of downtown office buildings by a certain amount, you can see what impact it has on the base. But you can also, through these tools, you could build in a TIF effect to say that, well, let's say half of those office buildings are actually in the TIF, so there's no benefit, no one else in Chicago is going to get a benefit of a lower rate on those half of the buildings that are in the TIF, because all that incremental value is cash that goes into the TIF, and it doesn't do anything to expand the base for others. So those are the kinds of things that we can talk about. We can talk about, hey, if you do this, you could be restricting the size of the base in your area, and here are the different ways, if you play out with different scenarios, how that could affect people's taxes. And that's where we can do it. Now, as the assessor, I never want to have the appearance of using my office's powers to penalize or reward someone who's calling for a TIF or fighting against a TIF. So we assess every building equally, whether it's in a TIF or not. But what we can do is give people tools so they can see what the impact is.
I'm not asking. I respect that point you just made. You don't want to look like you're opposing, let's say, Mayor was Rahm Emanuel, was his idea to have the Lincoln Yards TIF, or Lori Lightfoot, or what have you, or whoever the mayor of Arlington Heights is, because they're going to give the Bears a TIF for their stadium. I'm just saying that as a public service, your office is supposed to provide information to people.
Yeah. Yep.
And so there's just basic information. You're not making a judgment call as to whether it's a good investment to invest money into Bears, or to invest money in Lincoln Yards, or to invest money in whatever that one in the South Loop is. I'm blanking on the name of it. You're just saying, this is the amount of money we're investing. This is what's going to cost you people. You, the people, can make up your mind. But the way it's always been, Fritz, is they don't give you the information because they don't want people in Chicago to know how their money is being spent. That's my opinion.
So, and Ben, the area where we could have a bigger influence is actually on the decision of whether you should let a TIF expire, because when you let a TIF expire, that expands the base and lowers the rate for everyone else. And yet sometimes we see TIFs being renewed and perpetuated without any debate. And that's where our data can really help, because we could say
sometimes. I want an example when there was ever a debate, other than the Central Loop TIF, which way before your time.
You're still in Oak Park. The mayor let the TIFs expire here, and that increased the base for everyone. So that was good. It can happen. I know it's kind of a crazy scenario to imagine sometimes, but in Chicago, it can make a big difference for Chicago taxpayers if they let these TIFs, which are coming up for expiration in the next couple of years, expire.
Bunch of them. In fact, they just continue one right around where Cabrini Green used to be. I just saw they extended it. They're always extending TIFs. They extend down in Springfield, Fritz, when no one's paying any attention. Michael Joseph Maddox was the maestro of that one, quietly putting TIF extension clauses into various bills. All right, I'm going to leave you alone in this one. Listen. This is Houlihan, your predecessor, once told me. It was one of these liquid lunches we had from time to time. More liquid for him than me. And he told me that the TIFs were Daley's funny money. This is way back when. I don't know what you were doing, Fritz. I think you were out of Kenwood High School. You were probably just getting started in business years ago.
I was traveling around the world investing people's money.
You're an investment banker, right?
Yep. And not an investment banker, investment manager, but I know people don't make the distinction.
Yes, people don't make the distinction. Nobody makes that distinction except for investment bankers and investment managers. And he told me it's funny money. And I'm like, well, do something about it. But see, it's the money that they use to fund some of the biggest developers in the city of Chicago, Fritz Kaegi. You go up against that, and man, they're going to be clobbering you. You're not going to.
Well, Ben, I think a lot of the people who are buying stuff here, they're not even from here. Like the world wants to beat a path to our door. Our real estate is reasonably valued compared to the rest of the world. You get a 5% yield, 6% yield on a building that looks pretty great to someone in Europe or Asia who's getting like 2% on a bond on a good day. So a lot of the people from the rest of the world, they don't want this nonsense with elected officials and TIFs, and they don't want to hear that idiosyncratic stuff. They just want to know that, okay, if we can invest our money here, what kind of return do we get? What are the risks are? And they'll be happy to pay a higher amount than some of the locals might have been paying for these things. And so and I think there are also developers out there who they want their competitive advantage to be building stuff that people like, seeing the future before it happens, executing well, providing good service. And they don't want their competitive advantage to be like, oh, I know how to work the TIF system better than the next guy, or I know who to hire for my property. Because that's not a transferable competitive advantage. So I think, take a second look. Chicago's changing a lot. A lot of the old hinky stuff people aren't as comfortable with, and it's not served us well, honestly. I think Chicagoans have realized that you might think you're better off with some of these idiosyncratic things that we have here that are not transparent, but ultimately in the end you're made worse off. It worsens inequality, it's not transparency, it enhances corruption. Let's have like a more level playing field where everyone can come in, make sure we got guardrails so that people aren't pushed out. And then like that'll be a fairer system, and more wealth can get outside of downtown and the rest of the city too.
All right, fair enough. We'll leave it there. I'll restrain myself and not go into a diatribe against certain Chicago developers who haven't learned that lesson. And I will be watching Arlington Heights. I'll be watching you guys with those Chicago Bears, because I know they're going to get that big bear paw out, because you know they're not going to go in their honey jar, Fritz Kaegi, to build that stadium. They're going to want to. And you know what? Part of me doesn't care. If the people in Arlington Heights want to raise their taxes to give money to one of the worst teams in the history of the NFL, and I say that, I really believe that as a football fan, the Bears are one of the worst. If they want to reward mediocrity, God bless them. You know, Fritz, there's nothing. I got enough trouble with the city of Chicago. Go ahead, Fritz.
Man, in Arlington, Texas, you know, they built a new stadium like 20 years ago under George Bush. They just built a new stadium to replace that stadium, and they got subsidies again. I mean, you know, hopefully we can come to our senses around here.
All right, very good. And Fritz, thank you very much. Do you like the job, Fritz? 4 years in, 3 years in?
I do. It uses a lot of my skills. I like all the different ways that it touches on different communities, brings together different parts of my life, and we got a great team of people. I like serving people. I mean, the job is doing a good job in this office is being a good steward and valuing things correctly, and like not letting things get distorted, and providing better service. So that is good. People have been great in supporting us in our efforts, and they know it doesn't happen overnight. But I love the job. It's a wonderful job, and we're lucky to be here.
All right, very good. And I'll leave with this, my advice to people who own property in Pilsen: appeal, appeal, appeal. That's just the way the game is in the city of Chicago, the county of Cook. Appeal, appeal, appeal. Fritz Kaegi knows I'm telling the truth. He's got nodding his head. It's a crazy system we have. Fritz, thanks so much for taking time. You gave. It was always fun for me to take the deep dive into property taxes. I'm sure many of my listeners would prefer we kept the conversation to high school basketball, but I
Ben, we
appreciate
can save that for another day. I always enjoy coming on the show, Ben. It's always a good conversation.
All right, very good. That's Fritz Kaegi. He is Cook County Assessor. Thank you very much, Fritz. I also want to thank Sarah Lazare for in these times. Great job she did talking about the generals who advised us to get into the war and are still advising us to stay in the war. I also want to thank the man, the myth, the legend, the pride of joy at Alton, Illinois, without whom the show would be possible. And as Fritz and Sarah will tell you, back home in Alton, they call him White Lightning. We haven't heard that one in a while. A friend of mine sent me an email the other day. How come you don't call him White Lightning anymore? Anyway, give yourself a raise, take it out of petty cash. See you tomorrow, everybody.
And I tested very positively in another sense. So this morning, I tested positively toward negative, right? So no, I tested perfectly this morning, meaning I tested negative.